evening. In our continuation to our series of short devotions entitled Is the Bible Believable? Through Biblical Earthquakes, today we will revisit an event, a historical narrative, and one of the most monumental stories found in all scriptures. A true story that took place way before our time. It happened over 100 years after the flood, Noah's flood. Sa pagpapatuloy ng ating nasimulan na pagtatalakay na may pamagat na ang Biblia ba ay kapani-paniwala, sa pamamagitan ng mga lindol na nasa Biblia, ating muling bibisitahin ang isang kaganapan, isang pangyayari at isang kasaysayan na nagbigay ng matinding aral o leksyon. Isang kasaysayan na naghugis sa mundo ng ating ginagalawan sa ngayon. Ito ay naganap makalipas ang 100 taon pagtapos ng pagbaha sa buong mundo sa panahon ni Noah. Genesis chapter 10. Interestingly, this is one of the most neglected passages, one of the least favorite, and one of the most skipped chapters in all the scriptures. Itong kabanata na ito, Genesis chapter 10, ay isa lamang sa ilang kabanata na iniiwasan ng mga nagbabasa sa kadahilanan na ito ay naglalaman lang ng mga angkan ni Noah. However, contrary to what the many would say about this chapter, there is this table, or sa Tagalog, listahan, that both theologians and the Bible scholars calls the table of nations, or sa Tagalog, ang listahan ng mga nasyon. Here we can find the lineages of the son of Noah. This chapter consists of 32 verses, and in verse 1 it says, These are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Sons were born to them after the flood. Ito yung mga henerasyon ng mga anak ni Noah, si Shem, si Ham, at si Japheth. Okay, yung mga anak nila Shem, ni Ham at saka ni Japheth, they were all born, or sila'y pinanganak pagkatapos ng baha. Now, hindi ko po babasahin lahat ng mga verses na nandito sa kabanatang ito, pero yung mga ilan babasahin ko lamang po. In verse 5 it says, From this the coastland people spread in their lands, each with his own language, by their clans, in their nations. Sa verse 20 it says, These are the sons of Ham, by their clans, their languages, their lands, and their nations. In verse 31, These are the sons of Shem, by their clans, their languages, their lands, and their nations. And in verse 32, the last verse, These are the clans of the sons of Noah, according to their genealogies, in their nations, and from these nations spread abroad on the earth after the flood. Now, to explain further kung ano itong table of nations, it describes the sons of Noah. Itong kabanata na ito, ibinabahagi ang mga naging anak ng mga anak ni Noah, mga anak ni Shem, mga naging anak ni Ham at saka ni Japheth. Not only it describes every son of the sons of Noah, it describes also that they have different languages, different lands, and different nations. Bukod sa pagsasalaysay sa mga anak ni Noah, ipinakita rin rito yung magkakaiba ng lengguwahe, magkakaibang kalupaan, at magkakaiba ng nasyon. So, I hope you're getting yung mga ibang madalas kong tinutukoy dito, yung languages, kalupaan, at saka nasyon. Now, this table of nations, or The others called it the origin of Gentium. It lists all of the clans, the tribes if you will, the dialects or languages, and the nations. Again, this table of the nations is the genealogy of the sons of Noah. It is a list of patriarchal founders of 70 nations. Ibig sabihin, sila yung naging founder ng 70 or 70 na nasyon which descended from the sons of Noah. There were 26 nations that came from Shem, 30 from Ham, and 14 from Japheth. Overall, 70. Now from the verses that I just read, verses 5, 20, and 31, again, it mentioned there different lands, languages, and nations sa tatlong anak ni Noah, si Shem, si Ham, at saka si Japheth. Now in the next chapter, Genesis chapter 11, and in verse 1 in particular, it says, sinabi rito, now the whole earth had one language and the same words, isang wika at isang salita. Now in this chapter, the event that took place in the story of the Tower of Babel, it described there yung word na dispersion. For now, ito lang po muna ang ating pag-uusapan, yung dispersion, the word dispersion, or sa Tagalog, yung paghihiwalay-hiwalay or yung pagkakawatak-watak ng mga angkan ng mga anak ni Noah. I know for some of you who are listening to this, you guys already know what took place in Genesis chapter 11, particularly itong story nga ng the Tower of Babel. The story where God confused the language of those who lived during those times. This was the story where all men agreed to build one city and build one tower. Now, going back to chapter 11, it describes that there were multiple languages. In chapter 11 naman, wherein it tells us that the whole earth had one language with the same words. Chapter 10 summarizes the divisions of the sons of Noah, the different dialects, the different lands, and the different nations. In chapter 11, it summarizes the dispersion of the people, again after God had confused their language, no? Sinira, ginulo ng Diyos yung kanilang mga lengguwahe. Now again, let us talk about this word dispersion, or yung pagkawatak-watak or pagkahiwa-hiwalay or pagiging pagkakalat-kalat. In Genesis chapter 1 verse 28, the Lord said there, sinabi ng Panginoon, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. Notice the word fill the earth. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Sa Tagalog, may popular tayong napapakinggan, especially sa mga kasalan, na madalas sinasabi, humayo kayo at magparami. Here in this particular chapter and verse, Genesis 1:28, the Lord instructed Adam and Eve to multiply and thus eventually fill the earth. Here in this verse, the Lord is hinting or giving us the idea about the idea of people being dispersed or people being scattered, provided na nakapag-multiply na. Ang Diyos ay nag-utos na magparami at punuin ang mundo ng mga tao. God commanded men to multiply and fill the earth. But in the Tower of Babel, in the account of the Tower of Babel, men tried to do again the opposite. They wanted not to be scattered nor to be separated from one another. Wherein sinabi sa Genesis 11:4, it says, then they said, ito po yung mga tao doon, mga panahon na yun, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we dispersed over the face of the whole earth. Now, the people back then knew, alam nila, that if they don't build a city and if they don't build a tower, chances are they will be scattered, they will be separated, divided, or being dispersed from one another. They have thought that it would be best for them living in just one city. They claim that their strength is measured by numbers. They realize that if they stick to one another, it is the best option moving forward. Ito, nakita na naman natin yung pagsuway nila. But the Lord again says, let's go back to what Genesis 1 verse 20, it says, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. When God says this, His intention was to disperse them in communion with God. No? Nung sinabi ng Diyos ito, He was planning that eventually madi-disperse din ang tao once na nag-multiply na lahat, but in all communion or with a communion with Him. No? Ito ang intention ng Diyos, maghihiwalay-hiwalay sila na mayroong pag-aanib or pagkakaisa sa Diyos. Again, subalit, but apparently, after God had judged the earth, pagtapos husgahan ng Diyos ang mundo with the flood, because the thoughts of men during those times and the inclination of the hearts of men during those times were only evil continually. So after 100 years had passed, again here we go. Again, rebellion after rebellion. Instead of following God to disperse and multiply, to be dispersed and to multiply, instead of being scattered from one another so that the unknown world would be occupied, would be discovered, and subsequently give glory to the Creator because of His wondrous works, instead they all agreed to build their reputation by trying to make their own name through city building and tower building. Again, instead of being dispersed in communion with God, God had no other choice but to disperse them in confusion because of the hardness of their hearts. Mga kapatid, these were the plan. Ito po talaga yung plano ng Diyos from the very beginning, from Adam up to Noah, for people to multiply and eventually be scattered and fill the earth. Being dispersed or yung pagkakalat-kalat was not the judgment, but it was the original plan. Being dispersed wasn't the consequences of their actions. Again, it was the very plan ng Diyos. It was the communication that was confused by God. Just imagine if men of those days succeed in their plans of building a particular city and a tower. What would be the repercussions? Ano kaya ang mga magaganap kung nagtagumpay ang mga plano ng mga tao noon? Couple of things. It is a guarantee that things will be different. If the city were located in Shinar or in Babylon or in Iraq sa ngayong panahon, and if things do remain, kung nangyari nga yun, kung nagtagumpay ang mga tao noon, other places such as Egypt, America, even our country, Philippines, and Israel wouldn't be discovered. Therefore, Christ would come from Babylon, not in Bethlehem. And he will be crucified for our sins. He will be crucified within that city and not in Israel. Pentecost will be held in Iraq, but there will be no Jewish believers that would come from different places that do speak other languages. If that plan truly did work, there will be no other letters such as the letters to the Romans, Corinthians, Ephesus, and the others. It will be only the letters in Babylon or letters in Iraq. What about the Great Commission? Sabi ng Panginoon, go therefore and make disciples of all nations. There will be no nations except only a nation. And again in Mark 16 verse 15, go into all the world. There will be no world, only a city. Acts 1 verse 8, sinabi ng Panginoon, you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in Judea, in all Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Again, if that wicked plan did happen, the text would be like this: you will be my witnesses in all Babylon. What else? There wouldn't be a Revelation chapter 5 verse 10 na sinasabi ron that the blood of Christ, ang dugo ng ating Panginoon, ransom people or tinubos ang mga tao ng Diyos from every tribe, languages, people, and nation. Now, hypothetically speaking, if this evil plan did truly work and did truly happen, maaaring si Kristo hindi talaga kailangan pa maparito. Christ wouldn't have been, after all, Christ wouldn't have been here after all in this earth. The Tower of Babel is a rebellious act of those men against the holy and just God. Kung hindi ginulo ng Diyos ang kanilang mga wika, kung nagtagumpay ang mga tao noon nung gumawa lamang sila ng isang syudad at isang muog, maaring wala tayong mabuting balita, maaring hindi bumaba ang Panginoong Hesukristo para tubusin ang mga kalat-kalat na tao. Ang pagkalat-kalat o pagkakahiwalay ng mga tao ay plano na ng Diyos nung pasimula pa lang. Pero nais niyang maghiwa-hiwalay na may relasyon sa Kanya. Subalit, ulitin ko, sa katigasan ng ulo at katigasan ng puso ng tao, sila'y naghiwalay din naman. Subalit, ginulo at sinira ng Diyos ang pagkakaroon ng isang wika at iisang salita na meron ng tao noon. All God wanted was to disperse them in communion with Him. But they were eventually dispersed by God in confusion. In our next devotion, I will further share some more biblical lights with regard to this history, the Tower of Babel. Thanks for listening. God bless.